Hello everyone, and welcome to today's structured conversation, sharing data and marketing results in student affairs with Dr. Michael Christakis from the University at Albany. My name is Mary Lee Demeter, and I will serve as your moderator today. On behalf of the SAL Professional Development Committee, I thank you for participating in today's structured conversation. I also want to thank Dr. Christakis, members of the Professional Development Committee, and Margot Saltonstall from Northern Arizona University for all of their help in putting today's presentation together. A few logistics before we get started. Please feel free to adjust the size of your chat box here on the left to more closely monitor our conversation. You can just simply drag the window up to have some more room to look at the chat. And I encourage you to participate by asking questions, sharing comments, and providing feedback through chatting and using the various tools offered in the menu located above the chat window. Here on the left, you can see you can insert emoticons, and then you can indicate you've stepped away from the session with this little icon here with a timer in it. And over here, this third icon in with the hand is how you raise your hand. And finally, in order to respond to polls, this fourth icon up top here with the A will allow you to select your answer when polling. I will have your microphones muted, but if you are planning to use your mic today and would like to speak and offer a comment, suggestion, or pose a question, please raise your hand and I will unmute your microphone. Okay, those are the logistics. If anybody has any questions, feel free to chat them to me during the conversation as well. So let's get started. Today we'll be talking about sharing data and marketing results. With increasing calls for accountability of student learning, it's becoming increasingly crucial for student affairs professionals to engage in sharing data and results for various stakeholders across diverse formats. However, the need to demonstrate integrity and ethical decision-making often affects what we are able to share as well as how we are able to share it. Further, closing the loop has often been cited as a major challenge facing student affairs professionals engaged in the assessment process, as we often find our data and results remain dormant during the decision-making process for numbers of reasons. This structured conversation will illustrate best practices rooted in ethics for sharing our data, identify various technologies for visual representation of data, and offer a variety of strategies for marketing your results across diverse audience. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Michael N. Christakis is serving as the Interim Vice President for Student Success and is also a public service professor at the University at Albany. Before joining the Vice President's office in 2007, Dr. Christakis worked in residential life and spent 2 summers working for the university's orientation program. Known nationally for his work in student affairs assessment, Dr. Christakis was responsible for leading efforts to develop a comprehensive assessment program for student success prior to the university's reaccreditation in 2010, and is credited with developing the Student Learning Project, the university's co-curricular student learning outcomes framework, for which he received the 2012 NASPA Assessment Innovation Award. Dr. Christakis currently serves on a number of organizations, and he's been published in several arenas and is very active in presenting, and we're very, very honored to have him join us today and share his expertise with us. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and join the conversation as Dr. Christakis helps us understand how to effectively share data and market results in student affairs. Take it away, Michael.
All right. Thanks, Mary Lee. Hello, everybody. Thanks for being with us this afternoon. I had asked Mary Lee to try to curve the intro as much as possible because I wanted to get expectations as low as humanly possible as we were going into this presentation, but I do appreciate her very warm remarks. So this has been on the books for some time now, and Mary Lee and I have gone back and forth a couple of times about how to best frame a conversation surrounding how we share data or close the loop in student affairs. So my hope really is that this becomes a conversation. I'll try to set the stage a little bit in the next few minutes, and then my thinking is that we'll put out a couple of poll questions and I'm going to lean on Mary Lee as my technical expert to guide us through that, to see sort of where we're at on our respective campuses when it comes to sharing data. And then my hope is to leave enough time at the end for some questions and an exchange of ideas. I do plan, I will, because I think I can manage this tool, show you our website here at the University of Albany and how we go about sharing results with various audiences as well. So, loop closing and marketing. And I think that as I was reflecting on this, and some of you may have also sort of been in this predicament at some point, is assessing through a variety of vehicles, whether it's sort of surveying or focus grouping or interviewing or doing some sort of content analysis on things, is one part of, I think, what we try to get at. The other part, equally as important, is how we sort of come around and close that loop that exists, particularly with various audiences that we have on campus. And I think that as we consider challenges that we're confronted with, one of the challenges really is who we're sharing results with. So how we share findings with a 17 or 18-year-old is likely slightly different than how we are sharing results with our vice president, our vice chancellor, or our president for that matter. And that may be different than how we're sharing results with our students' parents or with state legislative leaders for those of us who are at public colleges or universities. So it doesn't make that step of sharing information easy, because you sort of need to finesse the message based on who the audience is. So some of you may know, and I want to lean on this a little bit throughout the course of the presentation, but there is, and Mary Lee can clarify for me, but Mary Lee and I worked on a book chapter for a book that I think is coming out soon. And our focus had been, or is in that chapter, how do you frame information, findings, data, and market those results. And we have laid out sort of 8 essential elements, is what we called it, for how we go about sharing those things. And I'll go into some more detail on each of these as we go through this. But our 8 essential elements were authenticity of the data, knowing your audience, which I sort of alluded to just now, presenting user-friendly information, the use of high-quality visuals, which can be a bit of a challenge sometimes, particularly in the kind of fast-paced social media environment that we're in. Choosing the outlets that you leverage those findings through wisely, not becoming stale when it comes to what you're putting out there for your various audiences to see, making those results actionable, and appreciating the importance of following up on findings. So you can close the loop once, but there probably is something to be said about closing the loop a couple of times after that as well. So in our sort of work as we were piecing this chapter together, we were trying to leverage, to some extent, literature that exists in student affairs assessment with literature that exists in sort of the marketing world in some ways. And I, for one, will confess that I'm not a marketing expert. I can't speak for Mary Lee in that regard.
I'm no expert either, Michael.
Okay. So that makes at least 2 of us that are not marketing experts. But, our data and our findings only really have legs, if you will, if there is something to be said about how we share it and how actionable that shared data can be. So for starters, let's do a poll. Ready to do a poll, Mary Lee?
I'm ready.
All right. Let's see. All right. How do you most frequently market your assessment results? All right. So, I'm not giving you a cop-out answer here, so you can't pick all of the above. But how do you most frequently market assessment results from your office? And my sense is, given the folks that I know that are on the call, you're sort of all over the place in terms of where you reside, vice chancellor's offices, assessment offices, maybe some unit level offices, but how are you most frequently sharing your results with various audiences? So awkward pause.
I know, uncomfortable silence.
Uncomfortable silence.
For those of you, again, if you're not sure how to answer the poll, the icon's right above the chat window. There's a little A, and that will give you an A through E choice to respond to the poll. So we'll give a moment of awkward silence.
Awkward silence, which Mary Lee and I hate. We hate, we're not awkward silence types.
A few more seconds. I see just about everybody has responded.
There's interesting stuff coming in here. Interesting stuff.
All right, I will go ahead and publish those results.
All right.
In 5,
drum roll, please. Let's see if this
3,
thing comes through.
2, 1.
1. Oh, bam! Look, it totally came through. That's great. All right.
Look at that. No one's using social media.
And no one is using social media. And is Lisa Endersby on? I think she's on here. She's probably
here.
Lisa's probably shocked by that.
Oh, I think she wants to speak. Was that a hand raised? What was that?
She's on. She's on. And we can certainly, if Lisa wants to chime in on some of this, I'd certainly welcome that. So it looks like presentations was the way we present most of our results. I'd be interested to sort of drill down on that a little bit. Flyers and other. So if you're in the other category, I welcome you maybe either chiming in by phone or maybe dropping something in the comment box about what other, these are just ones that I came up with, but what other avenues you're using. I think we'd like to see that. So if you wouldn't mind dropping that in there, that'd be great. Web pages, and I actually, as I'd indicated, I'll show you our web page here at Albany where we sort of leverage those results. But interestingly, what I'll show you in a little bit on our web page is largely copies of flyers that we put out in our academic buildings and in our residence halls. We too are not all that advanced in the social media realm here at Albany, although that certainly is a place where our students are. And I think it does beg the question how we might be able to use that space better. I was actually in a presentation not too long ago that our communications person here in the division was giving to our leadership team. And she made an observation that Facebook is now probably more appropriate for our students' parents than for our students, which struck me as very interesting. And that our students in particular are actually more on Instagram and Twitter these days, which I think to some extent are two avenues in social media that would make good sense if we can make that data and those findings accessible to them. Because of sort of the photographic nature of Instagram and the brevity that Twitter lends itself to. So that's something to think about.
And I just want to share, because both Darby and Kristen are saying, hey, it's not that we're not using it, it's just not the most frequent.
Mm-hmm.
I just find it surprising that it's not the most frequent somewhere, considering if we want to get the word out to students who are increasingly no longer non-traditional and they are adults and they are working and it's not parents. I just find it like, wow, nobody's using that as their primary method, but everyone's on social media.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting caveat, and I do, thanks, Darby, for sort of clarifying that. I mean, I think you're right. I think the social media piece is really more, it's not a standalone, really it's a sort of an added vehicle. So if you've got a presentation or a flyer that exists somewhere in the technological World Wide Web space, you may be able to sort of send people to that area through social media, but it's more of a mechanism to push folks to findings and to data, but it's not the primary vehicle. So that is an important, I think, clarification point. In the moderator chat here, infographics was referenced. This is Teal mentioning that at MSU Global, they're leveraging infographics more, which we've actually tried to do a decent amount of here as well, and I'll show you a little bit of that through our briefing book. Yeah, and Lisa raises a question about, you know, the accessibility of data on social media, and I think some of it is how we're maybe trying to define accessible. You know, when Mary Lee and I were kind of talking about this idea of closing the loop and how you can effectively information share. Some of the thinking when we were using the word accessible was understandable. That is, you know, somebody who may not be in our world all of the time would understand what you're trying to get at in sharing that piece of information. So that's how we're sort of trying to frame accessible, although I would certainly welcome other people's thoughts on how else we could frame accessibility, and certainly there's a variety of ways to define that. All right, this was good. This was very good. Other questions or comments anybody has in terms of the other category? Again, there were some of you that did other. I am curious, again, in the sort of moderator chat, when you're doing presentations, how are we doing these presentations, and in what sort of venues are you doing these in? I mean, are these public presentations that, you know, open invitation to the campus community? Are these presentations to a particular stakeholder, i.e., your vice chancellor, your vice president? Are these presentations that don't necessarily require what I'm doing here now in terms of talking, but they're sort of presented digitally, if you will, to use the example at MSU Global? How are we using presentations? So board meetings, senior staff meetings, and by request of student groups. Jody, thank you for sharing that.
Open presentation invitations to SA staff and email list. I'm curious, what's turnout like, Kristen? For others who are using open presentation invitations, what's your turnout like? Varies based on the topic.
Which makes
15
sense.
and 20. Yeah.
I guess that would make sense. But honestly, 15 to 20, you know, I guess it depends on the size of your division, but I think that's a good turnout to talk about, to share findings with. That's great. Yeah, and you know, Daniel Newhart just mentioned that sometimes a presentation is really sort of a one-on-one interaction too, which I think is a fair point, that you're actually sitting with one or two other people and sort of mulling over or dissecting findings. That's I think an important thing too. And Daniel sort of references this idea of dialoguing, which I think is important. And then I also think, depending on who you're talking with, and the level of familiarity that one colleague or two colleagues has in the area of assessment or data, you know, might lend itself to sort of teaching up or educating. This goes to the notion of how accessible and understandable the data is to a particular audience. So if you're able to sit with a colleague one-on-one and have that discussion, you know, they may very well identify something in that data that you hadn't seen before because they're looking at it from their sort of their seat at the table. That's a terrific point. That's a terrific point. This is excellent. Thank you for sharing. Let's pull up another poll. You ready, Mary Lee, for another one?
Oh, wait, really quick. I just wanted to share that Darby says that first S&T members present results at least once a year, and if I understand correctly, they get about 20 people.
Oh, wow.
So, but yes, I am. If there are no further comments or questions at this point, I'm ready for our next poll.
move on to the next poll. All right. So who markets? I started out, saying that at least in my case, I'm not going to speak for the remaining 25 of you who are in the room here, but in my case, when I got into the assessment business, it was a lot more pure assessment. That is, I was sort of looking over data, doing data analysis, and the like. There was not this notion, this idea of marketing was not something that I'd given a great deal of thought to. That, of course, my perspective has changed significantly over the course of the last decade. But who's doing the marketing? Who's doing the marketing in your respective areas, particularly if you're one-person shops, or if you're in maybe some more robust assessment operations where you've got 1, 2, 3, 6 people working on things. But who's tasked with doing the marketing? And at least in sort of our thinking, it may not be just you. So you may be an office of one, but you're able to lean on your university, your institution's marketing folks to do some of this going forward. So tell us who's marketing for you.
Okay, we have about 9 responses thus far. Again, you can respond to the poll using that 4th icon over to the right above the chat window that has the little A on it. More awkward silence.
We hate awkward silence.
See.
All right, this one's not actually shocking me all that much, which is interesting. So.
All right. Give it a few more seconds. All right. Publishing the results in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Boom. All right. So apparently we're on a call with a bunch of marketers. I didn't know that was going to be the case, but that's who we're sitting with here. So it looks like the vast majority of you all are doing the marketing.
And I just want to clarify, because Maureen says she selected B, Maureen Cochran, but the person is not a marketing professional, but works with the Divisionwide Marketing and Communication Group that is comprised of marketing professionals.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you, Maureen. So looks like a lot of folks are marketing themselves. Looks like there are some folks who've got professionals, and this I think speaks a little bit to Maureen's point.
And I see that Darby says they have a brand new marketing and communications manager that will be sharing results for the division. Okay.
Which I feel like is a trend that we're seeing more and more in student affairs. And I'm not going to hypothesize that it has a lot to do with us assessment types. But I feel like increasingly divisions are deciding that they need to engage their primary stakeholders, which are likely students, in creative marketing. And so they're identifying people or offices, in this case, within the division to do some of that. To some extent, it may also be an offshoot of the institution's effort to market more. But it begs the question as the field continues to advance both in assessment and in what we're doing with marketing. If 13 of us in this case are marketing on our own, our assessment results in this case, what kind of case do we need to be able to make to, in Darby's instance, the new marketing person, to say, hey, here's some good information that we want to push out to our students. Can you help us get to that place? An example for us is, and again, I'll go to the website in a second, but who's responsible for developing our briefing book in this case? And some of you have heard me say this story before. And at Albany, assessment is an additional responsibility to an AVP, basically. But when we produced the very first briefing book, this was in 2007, 8. I literally, laid the thing out and then literally printed it out on a decent quality color printer. However many, we did a very small run at that point of maybe 20 or 30. But I mean, talking about soup to nuts. I mean, I basically was the author, the literal publisher, and I think I took it out to get bound. But that was, so that was 7 years ago. Now we still basically have a graduate assistant who's tasked with doing the briefing book over the summer. But we just recently identified a marketer, a marketing professional for our division. So that responsibility of the briefing book now, sort of the design part, will go over to the marketer. So again, I think as VPs in particular, vice presidents or vice chancellors, sort of are considering how their divisions are shaped and structured, it behooves us to be sure that the assessment, our assessment agendas and the data we're sharing is top of mind for these folks, because you want to get it in front. I think it advances our cause to try to get it ahead to these new marketing folks to see if we could think creatively about how we're sharing information. I'm going to show you in a little bit something that I thought was creative that we did this fall here at Albany with one of our poster campaigns that we had done for some time. This is really very excellent stuff here.
I think it's interesting. Ann shared that they now have a division-wide marketing team from all departments, and they're using a consultant to jumpstart and get the plan organized. So I kind of think of that structure is kind of like a parallel to some assessment teams or assessment councils at other institutions. Ann, am I reading that right? That's kind of the way I'm perceiving it.
And Maureen is saying the same thing, that they just added a division-level marketing communications director as well. So, I mean, it seems to me that might be a trend. I will say, not to deviate from this discussion on marketing, but I will say that I think there's also a good amount of energy in student affairs divisions around sort of technology shops as well, where we've sort of historically had siloed technology functions in units. I think increasingly you've got divisions that are saying, well, let's try to glean greater efficiency with our technology, both infrastructure, web page, telecommunications even, into some sort of centralized unit. So I think that, to Mary Lee's exact point, I mean, assessment should almost be running in concert with these marketing entities and even the technology, whether it's a technology committee or a technology office, that are starting to sprout up in various student affairs divisions around the country. And you all might be experiencing this on your campus now. But I mean, I think there's, to use a term that I've used on campus with our staff, I mean, I think there's a dial that's slowly being turned as it relates to sort of amping up divisional infrastructure for things. Because, and this is a presentation for another day, but there's only so much that that professionals can take on before we reach a breaking point. And assessment's part of that, and I think that is what has sort of spawned not really recent, but developments of sort of standalone assessment offices in divisions that many of us are probably part of. But this sort of idea of assessment by committee has morphed a little bit. So you've got folks that are more charged with this role, and I think you're seeing that increasingly with marketing efforts now, and to some extent with technology efforts. So that marketing is a big thing. Maybe there was a divisional marketing committee, which again I will say I think there's benefit to the assessment team tying into. But now you're seeing professionals that are taking on these marketing and communications roles. So I think if you're the assessment person or part of an assessment team, in the spirit of kind of constant collaboration, particularly inside the division, there's something to be said about trying to reach out and connect with that marketing person. Because again, whereas 13 out of 26 of us say we're marketing, I don't think anybody would necessarily make the case that we're marketing experts. The stat that I gave you on Facebook I wouldn't, that's not my world. So I'm not reading about, who's on Facebook, whether it's parents or students. There's obviously a professional or division now that knows that far better than I do. So it's really, I think, literally an issue of playing to people's strengths as much as we possibly can.
Oh, I see we have a hand raised.
Oh, a hand up. Well, this is great. All right.
I can't find it.
I see it. Do I just select her here? How does this work, I wonder?
Oh, there it is.
Do you have a question,
He
Teal?
somehow got to the top, that's why. Yeah, okay, so Teal, yeah, you're unmiked. Go for it. Or unmuted.
You're unmiked.
I wonder if maybe he's having a problem.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah, because you want your permissions on. So Teal, your audio permissions on. I'm just not sure if your mic's working on your end.
Nothing.
Yeah, but I do see that Teal did chat in prior to me encouraging people to raise hands and all unmute mics. Teal is a senior marketing communication person and works very closely with the assessment specialist. Yeah,
okay.
And yeah, looks like mic issues are happening. That's the second instance now I'm seeing of kind of this marriage between assessment and marketing.
Which is great. I mean, I think that's great. I think that's where it's at going forward. And I've actually, whether it's, this particular structured conversation, but going forward, particularly given sort of what we're hearing here with assessment and marketing folks who are tasked with marketing. I mean, this might be something to consider when we're talking about national conferences and things, and how these two sort of areas are working further, furthering their working relationship with each other.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, but I think I didn't realize I needed to click on talk to say something.
Okay, there's a Teal.
Very simple. That answer was a little too simple to be apparent. So I work very closely with our assessment specialists at MSU Global, as I mentioned, and that wasn't something that was predetermined before I started here. I've been with MSU Global for about 9 months. And what happened is we decided we wanted to really tell the story of our impact, and so it became natural to work very closely with the person managing assessment to figure out what our impact was, and then deciding strategically how do we use that data to influence future decisions, and how do we use that to really show people the types of impacts and value that we offer. So I think it's a very powerful combination, and if you put people who are working in those areas close to each other, we have a pretty collaborative work environment. So conversations just naturally led to those collaborations, but I feel like it's a pretty natural fit.
I think you're totally right, Teal, and it sounds to me, I don't want to sort of put words in your mouth, that it was sort of, that you suggested it wasn't deliberate on the onset, but that it sort of happened. So I think an important takeaway here is how can we make that more deliberate for those of us who may not have a marketing person yet, but might at some point, or for that matter, for those of us who feel like we might be able to make a pitch to a decision maker about attracting a marketing person to the division for purposes of advancing both our work in assessment as well as work more broadly as it relates to student life on our campuses. Thank you. Great. All right, so let's do great discussion on this. And it seems to me that there's some natural synergies that are going on campuses between assessment professionals and bona fide marketers, which is good to hear. So let's do the last poll question here is trying to get us to think about what some of our greatest challenges are when we're considering marketing assessment results. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but it's stuff that was sort of percolating in my mind, and when Mary Lee and I were sort of developing that chapter, these were some of the guideposts that we had sort of considered. So give some thoughts on what your greatest challenge is, particularly if you're among the, I think there were 13 of you all that said you were the primary marketer. What goes through your head, and what challenges are you confronted with when you're trying to figure out how to market information?
Time once again for another awkward silence as we wait for folks to respond to polls. So I look at these options and just thinking back to some of my experiences, it might be hard to just choose one.
I'm actually also looking at these and thinking there's one that just now came to my mind that is not included, but I will mention that in a little bit.
All right, we're just about done. I'll publish the results in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right. So of interest here is that none of us selected B, not that any of us didn't think of it, but again, this was the greatest challenge. So, maybe this issue of understandability isn't a huge thing for us as far as challenges go. It looks like the actionable piece is emerging as the greatest challenge.
Yeah, and I actually just want to say that Kat made a comment that A and D, especially when trying to market to students versus administrators, so there's where the audience kind of seems to complicate things.
Yeah, that's a good point. The item I didn't put up there that, as we presented the poll, I thought might be worth putting up there is sort of politics on campus, which I think unto itself is probably a whole separate conversation. But when you're putting findings out there, there's clearly some sensitivity to how those findings will be read or used. And while there's some tie-ins to sort of the relevancy or saliency of a particular issue and the actionability of an issue, we can't sort of ignore, nor should we be ignoring, whatever political factors might be existing on your campus, whether it's among students, between students and administrators, other stakeholders. So I submit that politics or the political atmosphere might provide a challenge for us as assessment decision makers as well.
And I see that Joe Levy has shared that the biggest challenge for him is getting the buy-in and being able to influence others to share the data for their areas. He says it means less when coming from the assessment staff versus coming from the area staff. Oh, I could totally relate to that. Additionally, if not coming from the respective area, assessment staff may not be allowed or approved to share information on their behalf for political reasons, accessibility. And I see that Jody's commenting that contextualizing complex finding is a challenge. But, just back to the politics, I also even want to note that sometimes maybe we're not sharing our data or marketing our results to the best of our ability, maybe because politics are preventing us from doing that.
Yeah. Jody, I think, raised an interesting point in terms of context, but this notion of there's not everything lends itself to a nugget, is what Jody says, that is easily put into a tweet or a soundbite. I think you're right, Jody, and I think that's one of the challenges. You name any number of larger institutional or national studies, NESI, Kuho Eyes, EBI, Res Hall, Benchmark. I mean, those are pretty sizable studies that probably glean quite a bit of information. So, what do we pull out of that? And it's not easy to identify a single nugget in those studies to share. So, I would agree with you that dissecting that and trying to find a nugget is not an easy undertaking by any stretch of the imagination. There were some others of you that said other. If you're willing to share in the comment box, we'd certainly welcome what other challenge. Joe had indicated the buy-in and being able to influence others. I think that's important, and that is a challenge. We had an experience at Albany, probably a decade ago, where assessment sharing wasn't anything that we did as a matter of practice. So, units sort of own the data, and we're not inclined to want to share it, good or bad. We've I think, significantly made headway to change that. In fact, I know we have. So now there's a seamless nature to how people are exposed to data, what data they have. There's no reservation in terms of asking for data. And we've, I think, all sort of come around to being able to put good data, so bragging points, if you will, out there in a variety of forms.
And I see Jasmine kind of piggybacked off what I suggested about she believes most findings are avoided that leadership may not want to share or consider actionable alternatives. And then Jason commented that even finding people who are interested in reviewing the results. And this kind of makes me think back to that survey moratorium.
Oh yeah, we had done. Some of you know, at Albany we had done. It sounds so morbid, but we had done a survey moratorium. This was a couple springs ago, where we basically suspended all survey activity in student affairs, at least, because the dilemma we had encountered was that folks were surveying, but they weren't doing anything with the findings of previous surveys. And some of our thinking was the best way to sort of tackle that was ease up or pull back almost entirely on new assessments. And it was largely focused on surveys, although we didn't see a lot of other things percolate to the top. And instead, during that time, focus on looking at your results. And some of them were results over several years. So there were many units that did a sort of annualized survey, mostly satisfaction, and then try to look at sort of longitudinally what kind of progress you'd made in various areas, and then actually draft reports. And we had some level of success. I would be hesitant to say that it was a complete, awesome experience for us. I mean, I think that when you don't have, when our thinking was, if you didn't have to do a survey, you would spend that time reviewing your data. And I think, certainly for all of us who are in student affairs, that on any given day there's a decent number of fires or issues that need to be put out. So there are things that take you away from that, which is why I continue to maintain that surveys are so easy for us to do, or preferred, because they're easy. They may not be great because they are so easy to put together. But when you put it out there, you can get some pretty quick and easy results relatively quickly from various stakeholders, particularly students. Yes, and Daniel actually indicated that Shu calls this data rich, analysis poor, which I think is a professional problem for us in the field. But I think the opportunity, though, and I think Daniel's spot on in articulating Shu. I think that the opportunity for us is how do we leverage this opportunity to market results as sort of a foray into analysis, right? I mean, that should be, I don't know how you want to take it. You clearly need to get the data first, and at some point you ultimately want to share it. And then somewhere in the middle you want to do a deeper dive of analysis, because you want to be able to, I think, look at the various findings, so not just that sort of one nugget, as somebody had said, but maybe several nuggets that we share. But maybe encouraging us to consider marketing as sort of, I hate to say the end, because this is, of course, a loop, as we all know. But at least sort of a relatively close conclusion on their first cycle around might be a way to spur us to do a deeper analysis on the data that we've examined. All right, so we've got just a little bit of time left, and I do want to, I think some of our thinking was we leave some time for questions. So I wanted to quickly take you to our webpage. at Albany. And some of you might be familiar with this, but so it's albany.edu student success assessment, so /student success /assessment. The findings are over to the right-hand side. You'll know findings outreach. And if you go there, and again, so this is to an earlier comment we made about how we're sharing information. These are all largely print and or available digitally through our website. We don't do a terrific job really at all of pushing this out on social media, but these are just some of the campaigns that we've done over the years. Some of these have sort of gotten stale, so to one of the points that I made early on, how do you keep things relevant? But we had this Your Voice campaign, which we had built off of what they were doing at UNC Wilmington, where we would find sort of that nugget, if you will, and indicate through a graphic, what our findings were. So, we heard, this is the University Health Center, we heard that the call wait times were really long. We ended up doing this, and then the results were that. And so these posters were actually put up in the health center, so students that were using our services could actually see what we were doing with the data. And they actually, of course, also noticed a drop in the call wait time. Another one, just to give you a sense of how you can sort of change it a little bit. So similar, actually identical piece of information, but we just framed it differently. So in this case, these, the previous thing was a larger poster flyer. These were actually smaller note cards that we had created that we actually stuck on top of the actual megaphone that you'll see in the lower right-hand corner. We had put so they were standing up, and we inserted the note card on top of it. So it sort of expanded the branding of the Your Voice with information that was put on it. And they were note cards at, in this case, the reception area where you were engaging a receptionist when you come in. So again, the idea was, how do you get it in front of students? How do you reinforce the notion of calling? So we would put, in this case, it was calling the health center, so we put the health center number in there as well. So we used it as an educational tool also. So that's Your Voice, and again, you all can access this. The other one I wanted to share with you is the pulse of student success. And again, this is finding that piece of data, and this is targeted at students in particular. And how do we put this out? So we just this last in January, I guess, developed these new pulse posters. And this was the thing I was trying to tease out before. What's neat about these is that they're not actually on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. We actually cut these out, so they're round circles. I actually I don't think I've got a hard copy I can hold up for you here, but the idea was on a board full of flyers, so what is going to stand out? And again, our marketing folks had said, well, if you change the shape of the thing that's on the board, it might pop out at you more. So we rethought what the shape would be, and we ended up making them circles. And I think we did 4 or 5 of these that we put around campus and in the residence halls. And again, it was both articulating information to our students. In this case, it was the number of students that participate in on-campus recreational sports, as well as where they could go if they were interested in finding more information. So it's not just us sharing a finding, and this was 3/4 of UAlbany students. This was from our NASPA consortium NERSA study, but also how can you get involved in recreational activities by going to our campus rec office to find more information. We did a similar thing with fraternities and sororities. And again, in this case, so this, again, speaking to the social media part of it, so social media wasn't our primary thrust in this, but rather a secondary thrust in that we encouraged students, if they were looking at this, to follow our fraternity and sorority affairs office on Twitter. So again, it wasn't a way for us to share the data necessarily, but it was a way for us to push students to that medium for purposes of getting more information on our particular program. Just to give you a quick sense, I want to be sensitive of time here. There are some older Pulse campaign posters that we had done. These were, I think, a little bit more traditional in their look and feel, so 8.5 by 11. We tried to incorporate some infographic-ish images on here. This one has to do with campus safety, and again, these would sprout out sort of strategically around campus at different times of the year. And we would largely, in these instances, the Pulse, and you can see the laundry list of pulses that we had created over the last, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, try to tie them to national studies that we had been a part of. So this one actually is the 2009 NASPA Consortium on Campus Safety and Student Conduct. And then what we did a couple of years ago was actually initiate what we called our freshman poster campaign, which was a spin-off of the Pulse, and that we tried to get, talk about sort of relevance or saliency, what we thought were important data points in front of our first-year students. So this is sort of consistent with some of the stuff that our counseling center has done in the social norming field. So if a student sort of keys into other students are doing this, I'm going to do it as well. We were trying to leverage, in this particular case, getting involved with them, and we tried to leverage the QR code part of that, where they could scan it and get redirected to a web page to find out ways to get involved. I will point out also on the right-hand side, if you're interested, because I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, the briefing book that we've done over the last, I guess, 6 years now is available on the left. If I clicked on it, it would open up a large PDF, which might be, not easy to read, but you can go look at it. And if you actually, on your own computer, I think if you've got Flash installed, it'll actually allow you to flip through the briefing book itself.
So, Michael, we have a question from Jody.
Oh, yeah, Jody.
Yeah, she'd like to know how you deal with negative findings. Do you ever publicize them?
We absolutely do not. I shouldn't say that. There was actually a couple of instances where we had less than positive findings that we did share. Now, I'll confess to you, I'm not sure we necessarily did a Pulse or a Your Voice on that. I think some of our philosophy as it relates to negative findings is how do we make them not negative? And when we are able to sort of flip the script on that, then we find an opportunity to share. That said, I don't want to suggest that we are at all adverse to negative findings. We just, at least here at Albany, in student affairs in particular, try to take negative findings and figure out a way to correct them, if you will. And then if we do glean some level of success from correcting them, we will then use it to share with students or with other appropriate stakeholders. So I guess we'll open it for questions, and I want to do this, Mary Lee, if you want folks just to comment on it in the chat or.
Okay, so does anybody have any last thoughts or questions? Again, you can raise your hand if you'd like to use your mic to speak. I see Darby says, I think when you get negative findings, focus on the action that will be done to make it better. And I couldn't agree more, because I don't think we should be, we need to be honest. And when there is an issue, we need to realize, okay, we need some improvement here. But I agree, showing the action that you did something to improve it.
Goes a long way.
Yeah, it goes a long way. And it starts to show students and other stakeholders that I didn't just spend 5 minutes filling out that survey for nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and Jasmine echoes the sentiment of transparency is key.
Let me I know we're totally over time here, so I apologize, but I wanted to just make a quick comment about the transparency piece back on the website. After we do institutional studies, as soon as that study closes, we actually send out a snapshot email to respondents, so they know, A, that we appreciate them taking it, and B, we try to, particularly given how quickly we can get preliminary results, to share some sort of top 6 items. So again, these aren't sort of the nuggets that we talked about earlier, but there's might be some interesting points, and I will confess, try to take sort of the most positive ones that come out of that. But we put it in an email, and there's examples of that you could jump on and take a look at, so people can see it. And then we encourage them to come back, because in most cases these are benchmark studies, so there'll be some national findings associated with that, but that usually takes a couple of months after we close our study. I just wanted to share that.
So I see it's 2:59 p.m. already, and I can't believe it. Are there any final questions, or Michael, was there anything you wanted to share as we wrap up?
No, this was a lot of fun. If we have another hour, I for one could probably keep talking, but I don't want to draw on too long. I do appreciate everybody's engagement throughout the session. I thought the polls were great, and I really did appreciate folks chiming in with what their experiences were. And keep the conversation going.
Okay, great. So if there are any more questions, I don't see any hands, and I'm not seeing anything come across chat. So with that, it is now 3 p.m., and we'll bring our structured conversation for today to a close. We enjoyed them too, Jasmine. We enjoyed everybody who participated in our polls to get an idea of how other folks are marketing results and what some of the challenges are encountered. For those of you that are still with us and still listening, I'll be sending out a link to the recording of today's session along with an assessment of learning outcomes and your satisfaction of our structured conversation. So please share your feedback with us so that we can continually improve our structured conversations. And I also wanted to let you know to please join us for our next structured conversation coming up on May 20th at 1 p.m. Eastern with Dr. Adam Christensen, who is Director of Student Affairs Assessment and Research at Penn State, where he will be discussing survey sampling for this Penn State poll. So for those of you that are curious and want to know how they're doing that over at Penn State, join us next month. Adam's going to tell all.